cover the whole subject in what we're talking about. So it may be that there will be a part two, and I can do the live demo at that point. Um, so Alex, what specials are they running? Alex, are you if you could bring up the slide deck for me. Um,
Absolutely.
so the topic here today, I wanted to talk about vibe coding, and I'm going to focus on Claude Code because I think that it's a really superior tool to the some of the others that are out there. If that doesn't, that's not to say that it's the only tool. And vibe coding is a skill that is very important. Doing it safely is really, really critical. What we're starting to see is a lot of people a lot of people that may not have been programmers or coders uh, that have now discovered these tools and are now um, uh, creating applications. The problem with those applications is that there are vulnerabilities in them. They're built in imperfect ways, and so there's a lot of opportunities for hackers to take advantage of this. So what we're talking about here is really, I'm trying to give a good set of best practices about how to do it in a safe way. And I'm also going to give some Claude Code specific details to really talk about some of the security elements that Claude Code has built in, and as well as that you can bring in from the community to really assure a level of safety to your customers in the pieces that you build. Okay, Alex, next slide, please. So I wanted to just start by talking about, by just really briefly the definition of vibe coding. Vibe coding is a term that has sort of come into the public, domain. Basically, what it describes is it gives you the ability to sit down and describe in English what you want and explain that to the tool. And then the tool actually will go in the background and build whatever you wanted out of, we'll actually build it from scratch. So, Claude Code, for example, does a really fine job in various programming languages, Python, Rust. It'll even do C. It'll do assembler. All kinds of all kinds of pieces. The second piece of it is that it will also do HTML and CSS, and it will orchestrate and bring the whole big picture together. So the promise of this is, how awesome is it that you can actually use English as your programming language? Now, at the same time, right, English has a bunch of ambiguities, and as you know, just from talking to others, right, I can express what seems to me to be a clear idea to you, and you might come away with a completely different impression. And vibe coding is no different. So part of the part of the discipline that I'm going to show you that really comes from my personal experience and from folks I've interacted with, classes I've taken, that kind of thing, is really meant to try to limit some of those problems. Um, just under this reality check, right? Hackers are out there, and we are creating more opportunities for hacking because as there's more code out there, there are more gaps, there's more holes. That's it. And then also, as I saw in the comments, right? That technical debt. Everything that you create here is something that ends up having to be managed and built onto and added to, and that needs to be a part of the equation as well. Now, Claude Code will actually do all that maintenance for you, but you still have to initiate it. You still have to tell it what's wrong, and there's various different ways to look at it. So if you go to the next slide, so Claude Code is actually a combination of two things. On the right-hand side, it's really, you know about Claude. That's the model. And Claude Code will run on any of the Anthropic models. So it'll give you a choice between Opus and Sonnet and uh, Haiku. Haiku is probably a little underpowered for some of the coding tasks that you might be doing. Opus may be overkill. At the same time, Opus provides a really, really smooth experience and does a lot of the troubleshooting and the pieces around it on its own. But that model is literally just a model. So what's happening in the background is that is that Claude, not you, are submitting plain text prompts to the model. In this case, over an API. But the real secret of Claude Code that is makes it truly superior is what we call the harness. And that is the actual application that runs locally on your machine that is responsible for structuring your input, breaking it down into pieces, deciding what needs to happen with it, and then feeding those prompts, building those prompts and feeding them to the model. So it really is a combination of two things. Now that Claude Code, the actual Claude Code component, runs locally on your machine, and so therefore, a lot of what you're doing is maintained locally. Um, for privacy reasons, you're not creating any more privacy strain than you would be by just going up to Claude.ai and entering something into the command line. The other thing to note here, right? Everybody, we've done a lot of talking about things like OpenClaw and other agents, right? Those substitute the left-hand side of this diagram. So those are harnesses, separate harnesses other than Claude Code. Claude Code, by virtue of the fact that it's supported by Anthropic, which is one of the biggest companies in the world, and it's extremely well maintained, happens to be one of the best. But you can substitute for that. Likewise, you can actually substitute for the model on the right-hand side. With a little bit of modification, you could actually run Claude Code on a back end that runs locally, run it on Llama or another thing. But really, for the best experience, you want to focus on using the Claude, the Claude pieces. Okay, so next slide. So let's talk about the objectives of the conversation and the risks, right? Um, what we're doing when we're building an application, we're vibe coding, is we're really telling Claude exactly what we want to see. And instead of telling Claude to use Python and to create these libraries and to code and to wire them in this way, what we're telling it is, look, I want a dashboard that will show uh, whatever it is you want to show in a very simple way. And I want you to design it and to build it. Now, the key thing to be aware of is the risk domains. And this is important because there are a lot of different kinds of risks when using one of these products. One of the risks is the supply chain, the input into the thing in the first place. You can download components, you can download data. All of those pieces could theoretically be threatened, just like in any other situation. Claude itself is an agentic harness, is an agentic framework, just like OpenClaw. And so it could theoretically have runtime risks that it could go off and do its own thing, things you don't want it to do. And so that's obviously a risk. And then finally, the code that gets output could have risks in and of itself. So there could be vulnerabilities in there. And so when we think about vibe coding, not just Claude Code, we really have to keep in mind those three areas and how do we minimize what's happening. If you go to the next slide, so I've just pulled out a few of the the kind of the some of the more prominent things that have happened with Claude Code, right? Top one, you have a remote code execution vulnerability that was found. You've had, prompt injection issues. You've had toxic skills, which are skills are we'll talk about in a minute. They're the components that you download from off or that you create that give Claude its superpowers. And there are people that are publishing those that have problems to them. I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but I do recommend that if you are a coder, you'd be really aware and you keep an eye out for the CVEs and the things that are coming along. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about how we configure Claude Code. And I know I'm going a little bit quickly because I've got a lot of material. If I don't get through it all, we'll go to we'll do a a, a second version or a second I'll have a second session on this. Um, uh, so Claude is configured by a set of markdown files. And where you put those markdown files matters. It's built so that you can build a hierarchy so that if you're installing using Claude Code in an organization, you can have an organization level prompt as well as a user level prompt as well as a project prompt. So you can build the broad general governance and outlines into your organizational level prompt that's represented here at the system level, and that would be found in the Etsy Claude file on most systems. There's also a user level prompt. And that one, so on most of the systems that I do, I don't have an Etsy Claude level account because I have a user account that has all of my broader preferences for how Claude should operate. And I have in there things like, using Markdown and what are the formats of Markdown that I want. I have the general security rules that I want it to always use. I have different components of that. And those I generally put into that home directory, the Claude MD file. Those will be generally applied across every project. But then for the individual projects, I actually have Claude MD files individually for that specific project. And so when I use those Claude MD files for is to build the definitions and the things that I want for that specific project. For example, if I want to use certain skills, I note them in there. If I want to give certain accesses, I note that in there. If I want Claude to do, to think in certain ways, like for example, when I'm building an application that requires a dashboard, I have UX principles like UX design principles. So I'm giving it some foundation materials so that it does the user experience just how I want it. Those types of things, and you can do those as a project at a project level. Now, that also is useful if you're going to use Claude to do other things. So for example, I use Claude to manage my entire Kubernetes cluster in my home network. Now, what's really cool about that is Kubernetes can be a little bit tricky to get it working right. So I have in my Claude MD file for that, I have some how-to on Kubernetes. I have all of the specifics about my network and how to access things. I have all of my how I like to see my manifest files. All of those different things are built into that Claude MD. So they don't necessarily apply to my coding projects, but they allow me to, but they're set up so that with a very, very simple English command, I can do a whole lot of things. Just for example, I have it set up so that if I come across something that I want to see how it runs, I can just give it the GitHub repo URL and say install this in Kubernetes, and it will do it. It will do everything all the way to installing it, setting up the URL, and so that I can access it. And so these are the kinds of things that you can really build. Now, sub-project generally I don't use, but if you're building a very large uh, multiple phase project, or you have, or if it's complicated, you might want to set up individual subdirectories with Claude.mds of their own. And then basically that Claude MD becomes the defining document for a sub-agent that is actually building your project. So it's all of this stuff is automated by Claude, but getting these things right in the first place really helps. Okay, next slide. So one of the things, so Claude has a bunch of built-in security features. And to be honest with you, this is one of the reasons why you want to use Claude for your programming, other than, instead of using something like OpenClaw. And those things are, the first one of these is permissions. Now, if you've ever tried Claude Code, you know that you give it a command, and if you're just starting out, it's going to pop up every 30 seconds and say, here's what I want to do. Do you accept this or not? Now, that's so there are different kinds of permissions that it's that it so when it the permissions in Claude are focused around certain types of functions. So if it's trying to execute a command in bash, which is a command on the machine, it will pop up and ask you to approve that. Likewise, if it wants to read or write a file, especially one that's outside of the folder in which it's installed, it's going to ask you for that permission. Other permissions that it asks for are browser, whether it can use the browser and whether it can use an MCP server, because these are things that you should know that it's trying to operate in the background. And then finally, you can tell Claude in advance that it is allowed to use certain tools. So, for example, I do it in my Claude.md file. I tell it that the tools specifically that I wanted to have access to for that session, and then it doesn't have to ask me for permission every time it wants to use one of those tools. So really thinking through the permissions, but understanding the framework. How are they, what are the permissions that are used and how they operate? And again, this is where one of our security concepts comes in, right? Least privilege access, right? We don't want Claude to just have free rampant access to the entire machine. So it's really important to think in terms of building your file structures hierarchically, so that the stuff you want to have access is all in a single folder so that it can access to it. You want to think about how do you restrict the permissions in advance if possible. Those types of things, and don't give it browser access if it's not necessary to do its task. Sometimes if you're doing a task and it's all of a sudden trying to reach out to the internet, you might have to stop it and ask it why it was doing that, because that might be an indicator that there's something going different, something going laterally, or it doesn't understand something, something that you don't want it to do. And so the trick is to give it as many permissions initially as you can, so that you're not just sitting there mindlessly hitting accept, accept, accept. When it actually does pop something up, it's important, and that's a piece to think about. And then there's one more thing. There is a mode where you can tell it to not pop up those things and just do what it wants. Obviously, that can be dangerous, and that is used with the flag dangerously skip permissions, which is when you run the Claude application in the first place, you use that -- dangerously skip permissions command, and then it won't ask you for permissions. Finally, just remember that when you give it permissions, you can give it permissions for for things for the session or for the entire, and if you do that, it won't ask you permission the next time it does something. So just be careful when you're doing that so that that you're doing it intentionally. Okay, next slide. And I know I'm going through this stuff quickly. I'm going to try to reserve, I'll try to stop for questions in a moment. Um, okay, so hooks. So hooks are an incredibly useful tool within Claude Code. And all of these harnesses are going to provide some hooks, but Claude Code's hooks are generous and they have a lot of they give you a lot of control. A hook is essentially a little an instruction built into the code that says when one of these events occurs, and the events are that top section, the available hook triggers. When one of these events occurs, if there's a hook configured, you can divert execution to a piece of code or an instruction that the user has set. So the most significant or the most useful tool or the most useful hooks for most situations tend to be the ones for pre-tool use and post-tool use. Now, just so that you understand, right? The way that Claude and most modern AIs work is that when the AI decides that it wants to take an action or perform an activity, it does so by calling what's called a tool. And tools are essentially in Claude language, they're little markdown files. As I've told you in the past, when I did the OpenClaw piece, I always build a Python connector to whatever the outside component is, and I build my markdown to use the Python connector. So in my case, tools actually are a combination of those two. Um, but if Claude is not going to do something, just act autonomously like browse the internet unless you've given it a tool that it can use to browse the internet. Now, those pre-tool hooks and post-tool hooks are what happens is Claude says, "Oh, I need to browse the internet. Okay, I see that I have a web browser tool. I'm going to call it, but before it does, it gives you the ability to add a pre-tool hook. Now, those pre-tool hooks are important because they aren't necessarily AI. They're not necessarily what's called stochastic, where it could be something deterministic. Like you could say, before you run this tool, execute this little Python script that does this thing. And so from a security perspective, this is really important because we can introduce different kinds of protections that are deterministic. In other words, we're depending on an AI to interpret it that can limit damaging things that the AI might do. So these pre-tool hooks that are listed here, are open source hooks that you can bring in and use to your advantage. So, for example, we're going to talk about using Git in a moment. You can actually keep a tool from corrupting your Git repo by using a branch protection hook. You can change the configuration so you can block certain modifications before you've actually run the tool to make sure that the tool doesn't do things that you don't want. Now there are a ton of hooks, of hooks available. But with these hooks allow you to call routines and to do different things that control. Now, likewise, you have post-tool hooks. Now, the post-tool hooks are after the tool has executed, but before it returns the output to Claude, to the main agent. You now have the opportunity also to insert a hook. And here, that Lasso Security Defender, that's a commonly Lasso is a company that builds security tools. This is an open source security tool, and it runs after the tool runs in order to provide, to make sure that the tool isn't going to inject something back into the main agent that is harmful. So that is, that's one thing. There are others, and again, right, these are really useful spaces. From a security perspective, with a customer that has, with a customer that has might have PII, we might want to insert a post tool hook to obfuscate the PII before it gets brought back into the main agent. So these are all components and things that we want to use. Now, I know that I've just given a summary coverage of this, but it's important to know that these exist. And we can go into these in more depth. I've got more content, but why don't we open it up for a couple of questions? Do people have questions?
Yes, Alex Perry just asked, are these tools on GitHub? Other than that, we're good.
Okay, so yes, so there's actually a couple of different there's yes, all the GitHub is going to be the primary sort of repository. One of the beautiful things about Claude Code and agent and these agents is that it has served so far to be a democratization of knowledge. That when you build something, you come up with it, you put it up on GitHub, and it's accessible to everybody. And so you can find tools for virtually anything up there. Now, that said, you probably want to vet the tools that you use, and with a security scanner of some sort before you actually just drop it in there and use them. And the reason is because if well-meaning folks can put tools up there, so can folks that have malicious goals. So it's really critical. But GitHub is really one of the places that I think that I search if I'm looking for a specific function or a specific add-on for my Claude Code. Okay, next slide.
Sorry, Steve, there's a
Yeah,
follow-up. How are
no
these
problem.
vetted third-party scripts scare me?
Okay, so that one, so the vetting is done. Um, it depends on the platform. GitHub generally does not do any vetting, and so that's why you have to be concerned. Um, let's see here. That wasn't a clarification. The uh, there are different tools that you can run on stuff coming in from the internet to check it out. However, one thing I'll propose is if the tool that you want is not real complicated, um, you know, put it, just open up a new window of Claude Code and say, build me a Claude Code skill that does X, and here's how I want to see it, and it will do that. So, for example, for me, when I use tools, in fact, I very rarely bring down a tool from the internet. What I do is I tell Claude, I want to build this tool, and I give it a description of what the tool is, and then I say any access to the outside world. So, like, let's say my CRM is in Airtable. So I say, Claude, I want you to build a tool that searches my CRM in Airtable and matches a user that looks like that is like X. That might be an example. And I will specifically say for the Airtable interactions, build a Python stub that is responsible for calling the API and that presents endpoints to the skill. Um, and so I can actually, it's actually something I should have thought to provide. I can actually provide you some scripts for building tools and building, building hooks and building these things for yourself so that you use the script that will structure the rest of the language, and then you just put in your own thing. So, Alex, if you could help me remember, I'll try to put that together and submit it with the rest of the materials as a resource.
Great, thank you. There's also Nicole. I'm not a coder programmer. I use Claude Code, Codex, and Manix to write code for me. However, these tool hooks sound. Oh, I lost it. Oh no. Okay. Sound like I should know how to write Python myself.
No,
Um,
you don't ever have to write Python yourself. We're going into a world where 100% of the machine code is is going to be created by machines. What you do in order to build a hook, and it's important to specify to Claude Code that you want that either you want to use one of the hooks that are built in, which are these, or you want it to build its own because it can build a new hook on its own. But that I don't recommend that. For now, I would say Claude, I would say build a pre-tool use hook to accept or to in Python, or you could say in Rust or whatever, to scan the input into this, the input coming from the main agent to see whether it, to see whether it does this or whether it has something else.
Steve, your sound cut out. Steve.
If you have any, I don't know if I just was, can you hear me? Okay, can you guys still hear me? Good. Okay. So what I will say is if uncertain for any reason, ask me before executing these instructions. And so what I do with that is it will actually come up and it'll ask you and it'll generally give you like a multiple choice. Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this or other? And then type in what you want. So it'll actually prompt you. And again, right, you can go even further on the other, I don't understand your options. Explain them to me and make a recommendation, and it will do so. And so you can actually have this conversation with it about how to structure itself to best serve you. And becoming comfortable with that is actually the best. And then at that point, you almost don't need to download any tools. You can build all the ones you want for yourself. Any other questions, or should we go on?
Actually, I do, Steve. Alex, if Claude can perform the same task as OpenClaw, what's the attraction then with OpenClaw? Everybody seems to be
Yeah.
jumping on the bandwagon.
The primary difference between Claude Code and OpenClaw is, and there's just a couple, but the primary difference is that OpenClaw is perpetual. It runs all the time in the background,
Mm,
and you can schedule tasks.
mm,
Okay, Claude Code is only going to run when you have it when you have your laptop open and you
mm,
have your screen up.
mm,
Now, that there's a caveat there, and the caveat is that Anthropic recently released a Claude Code slash command called loop, which will actually allow Claude Code to stay up and to loop through a routine, but it's limited to 3 days total. And I'm not really sure what their reasoning is on why they aren't, I mean, because they could easily make Claude Code just go full auto.
mm,
But I'm assuming that they have some sort of governance or care. One of the things that I think, that's really important to understand, right? OpenClaw is an open source project and it's built by just everyday people. Me, I've actually contributed a few pull requests to it. Um, Anthropic is actually a company that has well, to the extent that you can depend on this, they have a safety first philosophy, and they've backed off of it a little bit in the last few months, the last few years. But for the most part, it's the difference between having a a paid organization, a paid company, do all the management, control the strategic direction, versus having just sort of having it be crowdsourced. And so that difference means that Claude Code is far more ready for an enterprise environment than a tool like OpenClaw. Um, and I mean, it diverts a little bit. I've actually yesterday or the day before, I posted a couple of things in the community where I was talking about the latest NVIDIA, the Nemo Claw software that they just announced at their conference on Monday. The lines are getting very blurry, and but for if I'm going in front of a customer, an enterprise customer, I want to be able to propose an enterprise ready product. And so so Claude Code is, and I'm not sure OpenClaw is at this point in time. Does that help?
Got it. Great insights. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay, so Alex, can you advance to the plugins, skills, and MCP slide? I'm not going to go too deeply into this because we've really talked a little bit about it. A plugin is really skills are really the big innovation that Anthropic contributed to the world, and that's that in a simple markdown file. I can grow and expand the functionality of my Claude Code immensely. It's incredible what we can do with skills. In fact, eventually, where this is heading is that skills are going to become more and more and more detailed. So I'm actually going to be able to eventually download an entire marketing department skill, and it will just run my marketing department. And so, and it's again, because it's markdown, it's written in English, which is easy to modify, and you can actually, and it becomes something that it's a significant innovation, and it's really driven a lot of the excitement that we've seen. Plugins are probably less important. A plugin is a combination of skills and tools being interfaces to external things that can be downloaded in one shot, right? So a plugin might contain 25 different skills and 14 tools. But it's really important on those plugins to know, again, right, the provenance of it is important. MCP is worth touching on. I know that a lot of people understand it. MCP, so uh, when AI, the MCP is not that old, but it predates a lot of the technologies we're talking about. And it's called Model Context Protocol, and it is a standard way to access tools to access things or external entities out in the world. So, for example, Model Context Protocol I access the MCP through it's a server, and it provides an API that I can connect to from Claude Code. And on the back end, it's going to connect me to different functionality. Now, the trick is that MCP is an older technology and it's not handled as efficiently as skills are. And so therefore, and also one of its really big issues is proper authentication. So if I and you have to be really careful to put an MCP server out on the internet, because people will just bombard it, figure out what it does, and abuse it. Okay. And so that's that's problematic. So Claude has the ability to use MCP, and in fact, it does. You'll see it in a lot of things, but we are really moving to a world where skills are far more important. And the other thing is that the skills, while it's improved a bit with recent innovations, the skills are used much more efficiently, use context window space much more efficiently. And context window is actually a really critical concept. We'll actually talk about that a little bit next week when I talk about prompt injection, because one of the things that makes you susceptible to prompt injection is manipulation of the context window. And I will make that a lot clearer. I'll have a lot more on that next week. By the way, that session next week on prompt injection is going to be a blast. So I definitely invite you to turn up. It'll be kind of interesting. But I'm gonna kind of move ahead a little bit. I'm not going to get through all the content that I had prepared for today, but I think the next concept is really important. So I want to talk about it. I want to talk a little bit about what your next slide, Alex, please. I want to talk a little bit about what your workflow should look like. And this is so as we talked about initially, English language is imprecise. Okay. I might communicate something thinking that I'm communicating it exactly, and the receiver, in this case Claude Code, might receive something entirely different and unintended. And the thing about AI is going to follow exactly what it thinks your directives are. So if you don't communicate what you want properly or sufficiently, Claude Code is going to build you something that's different, and then you have to go back and revise, and basically it takes a long time. Probably the first several times I've talked to a lot of people that have tried Claude Code. First few times they've tried it, they've actually had to scrap what they were doing and go back to the beginning, because the thing got so confused and convoluted, because they had to make so many retroactive changes. The way you deal with that, the way you stop that, is that I don't do everything. I don't do things in one shot. What I'm going to do is my first interaction with Claude Code is going to be to ideate what the final results should look like. So I'll go back and forth and say, well, what would be the best thing? And at this point, it's just conceptually, what is it that I'm trying to build? Once I have that, I have Claude Code summarize that for me, and I say, okay, take this summary, and I've read through it now and made sure it's exactly the way I wanted to communicate it. And then I say, okay, now take this and build me a project spec, or build me an application spec in Markdown. And you can be more specific than that if you want. You can say it should have these sections, and talk about it. But you don't really have to. If you set it up, all you really need is say, okay, build a project spec. And what it will do is it will actually detail out all of the different, first of all, what it's building, and then it will detail out a roadmap on how it's going to get there. And so, and so then that gives me the opportunity to sit down and read that Markdown file. Sometimes it's 30 pages. Sit down and read that Markdown file and see if it's exactly what I wanted. And if it's not, I can just change it because it's in English. And when I'm satisfied, then I hand that project file back to Claude and I say, build this. And at that point, aside from maybe a few accept permission, I can pretty much walk away, half an hour, come back, and my application is built and it's done. And so that is, in my experience, it is absolutely an incredible way to do something, and do something efficiently and do it quickly, but not do it in a way that causes a lot of rework. It also is really useful because when I'm reading that spec file, I all of a sudden notice, I'm like, oh wait, I didn't intend that, or oh wait, this is kind of vague. I need to give this more clarity. And so so it's far more like how a product management uh a product management job would be. So, you're being basically a product manager, and you're building out the components. You're building out the product requirements document that drives the whole rest of the process that builds the thing. And it's the AI in the background that's doing the work. Okay, I'm going to cover two more concepts, and then we'll open it up for questions. And there's some other content in the files that'll be put up there. We'll just maybe have a follow-up session. So I want to talk a little bit about agent swarms, because this is something that's come up. For most tasks, the things if you follow the process that I've talked about, you probably don't need a whole pile of sub agents to do, to build a project. However, in a more complicated situation or under certain circumstances, there is a feature of Claude Code that is amazing, that is kind of amazing. It's called agent swarms. And what it does is, so essentially what it does is you hand Claude Code a task. And in this case, let's say I've given it my product requirements document or my product spec. What it's going to do is it's going to break that down, that product spec down into different bite-sized pieces. And it's going to spin off a specific agent to do those bite-sized pieces, to do each of those. And so it can actually do a bunch of this stuff in parallel, and then put it back together again, reconstruct it at the end, and present it to you. And now a couple of caveats for this function. First of all, when you set it up, it is freaking incredible. I mean, you can, first of all, it's like, it goes very quickly, and just watching it process. So the caveats are this: be careful about dependencies, because if you haven't instructed an agent to be wary, that there's another agent running potentially on, in a conflicting thing, you could have agents working against each other. So where does this happen? Well, one place might be if you have an agent working on a certain set of files in a certain part of the directory, you have another agent trying to access that directory at the same time. Yeah, you can actually create a situation where one agent makes a change, the other agent changes it back, the first agent, and they get, there's contention there. Now, it's sort of beyond the scope of the conversation today. How you do this? There are ways to do it with, there are ways to build out Git, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, or GitHub, where you build the tree in the first place and you identify the dependencies. For me, I find it almost as easy to have Claude Code point out the dependencies or identify the dependencies as part of the project requirement document, and then to identify, and then it'll actually sort of automatically spin off some of these agents. There's one more use of agent streams, and this one is, I'm sort of a control freak on some of this stuff, and so I have a little trouble giving up the control to let it happen, because all kinds of things can be unpredictable. But you could actually set up an agent swarm where it's a series of agents all working together and communicating with each other, and Claude Code will do that as well. Each agent would have its own claude.md file. Each agent is assigned a task. So you'd have a project manager that does it, that's explicitly told not to be doing any of the end work and to be delegating to the other agents. There might be a coder agent, there might be a debugging or QA agent, there might be all of the different components of the tool can be built as agents. And so this is where you see organizations trying to replicate entire departments of people that all have sort of interlocking tasks and activities. You do need to you do need to be explicit about interagent communications. That's a piece. Now, a few things to be aware of, right? If you're going to do it, a best practice is to install, gates, decision gates, just as you would if you were setting up a department, where a decision gate gets pushed to the project manager or to the executive. The executive is told to, if uncertain, raise it to me, the person, and I will make the decision. Some of them insert the human in the loop as the decision maker on a bunch of it, but you got to be careful with that, or you're going to lose some of the efficiency gains. The other thing is to be wary of is that this uses a lot of tokens. And if you think of each of these agents is going to be its own AI and it's all, running on its own, right? Those inter-agent communications, right? It takes up double the tokens, right? Because it takes up the tokens on the one side to form the communication, on the other side to receive it. And so you've got, so you have, you have to make sure that you've got sufficient budget to make that happen. At the same time, it can be very efficient, or it can be very effective to do it. Okay, last topic. Go to the next slide, please. Last topic I'm going to cover today, and you'll see I've got more content in here, so I recommend you look at it, and we'll come back and do a second session. GitHub. Essentially, Git is the industry accepted methodology for version control and for management of projects. It also happens to be the primary standard mechanism for allowing people to work together on a coding project. Git it can be complicated, and it's a topic all entirely in itself. However, what you can do is, Claude Code knows Git intimately, and there are various Git skills that can be added. And so what you can do is you can instruct Claude Code to commit or push stuff to a Git repo, and the Git repo can be on GitHub. There are others, but I just use a free account on GitHub, and I create a repo for each project. Repo is a repository for each project. For most of my repositories, I make them private, so they aren't just published to everybody. Some of them I publish because it's good to have, it's good to pay back the community, because we're using a lot of community resources with these skills. Whatever you're doing, it may contribute, and it's always a good thing to publish it back. So that's so that said, now there in every repository, when you're setting it up, there are a set of minimum bare basics that need to be created. One of the most important is something called git ignore, and it's a file that just goes in the root of your folder, and it's .git ignore. And this is how you prevent a file, for example, like a .env environment file, which has passwords and credentials in it. This is how you prevent that file from being pushed up to Git and therefore available to anybody that would access the repo. You always want to make sure that you have a git ignore file that has that has the basics in it. And what you can do is you can just instruct tell Claude Code, make a git ignore file that protects all of my credentials. Okay, so I have given you a functional overview on Claude Code and some tips on privacy and security. There's so much deeper I can go. I'm open to doing it. Certainly, if there are specific things you want to know, I really would welcome you to DM me in the community or just start a thread and I'll respond. And I'm happy to dig into individual topics. I'm actually happy to build an application in the open. We can all collaborate. So if people are interested in that, feel free to reach out. With that, I know we got 1 minute left, but I'm going to open it up for questions.
So there, you may want to go back and I can obviously help. There seemed to be a very interesting conversation around what Nicole had said a little bit earlier. I use N8N to build my agents and usually have Claude Code write the JSON for N8N. Do you recommend having Claude determine whether or not to use N8N? I've never given it that option to keep tighter reins on the agent. This is really more of your opinion on building agents. And then there was a discussion around that. So I can obviously, if anyone wants to come off mic.
Yeah, so I have N8N on my Kubernetes cluster. And I even take out the step of having to manually copy and paste the JSON. I've activated API and Claude. I just tell Claude build. I can just say build a workflow that does X, and it's absolutely incredible. Um, uh, N8N is great because you can introduce deterministic components to the workflow. It's not just depending on an agent that is making independent decisions on every prompt. If there's anybody that wants to speak up, I'm happy to. No, that's okay. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through all these questions. What other questions are there, Alex?
It was a couple people were going back and forth about what you just addressed. Carl said Claude Code makes N8N make and Zapier unnecessary. Grant says, Carl, yes, that's true if you're on another platform like Google Cloud Run. Nicole said, Carl, I'm not sure I totally agree with that. That's why I'm asking the question. Grant said, N8N make at all or overhead not needed, but from a cost basis, they are necessary. Nicole asks, I don't understand what you mean about being necessary from a cost basis. Grant responded, platforms like Cloud Run can scale up cost very fast if you are not careful. That's more controlled in N8N and Make. They are built in throttles that just don't have in Cloud Run. You can build 40 times faster in Cloud Run. Nicole said, thank you for clarifying. I'm not sure I have a good understanding of Cloud Run. I'll have to learn more about that. I do like the guardrails for N8N and token use control. And that seemed to be the end of that thread. Paul said, can you have sub-agents work in their own branch?
You can, and that's actually a best practice. So, that's one of the ways that you control it. Now there's still going to be generally in most applications still going to be interactions between different components. So you do have to take that into account. There are actually academic theories on how you do all this stuff with Git. So on what's the best methodology for governing multiple agents working together. It's crazy. The discussions are really exciting. I love geeking out on this stuff. I welcome anybody to reach out to me if you have a question, you want to work on something together, you want to, and again, my day job is cybersecurity AI. Feel free to reach out to me on questions associated with that. So
Great. Otherwise, everyone just loves you. Awesome
I love everyone.
presentation. Yeah, your skills are
Cool.
phenomenal, says Phil. and the content fascinating and also applicable to what I want to build. You've so convinced me not to deploy OpenClaw, although I may possibly just tinker with it on a separate box just to say I did it. Nicole said, thank you, Steve. This was a very helpful answer about N8N. Great presentation. So did Alex. Thanks, Steve. Grant, awesome
So Phil,
presentation.
if you're still on the call, there are actually some interesting alternatives to OpenClaw that are much tighter and less susceptible to things. So one of the experiments, and I posted about it, I have an OpenClaw agent. It's my day-to-day agent, and I have a Claude Code. Claude Code, it's sort of an agent, and then I have a Hermes agent, and I've got them all on Discord talking to each other and trash talking each other. They each picked a bracket in the NCAA's, and now
Wow.
tonight when I go watch the games, I'm going to be on trash talking with my agents.
That's great. I saw
And
your post. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
yeah, no, I'm posting about that. I'll post some of the better ribs on the site just for fun.
Yeah, no, I saw your post about Hermes, and I was wondering if you could like sneak it in one of your presentations just to have it run. It should be fun.
Yeah, I mean Hermes, the incredible thing, I was running Hermes on a local model.
Hmm.
So I was running Quen 2.5 9 billion parameter, small
Hmm.
model, right? Runs on six, on my commercial. I have a commercial GPU with 16 gigs of VRAM,
Hmm.
and it was running just fine.
Hmm.
I had to build the prompting. I had to build the prompting files a little bit because it was a little bit wordy. Other than that, it runs great and it spins off agents. It uses tools. It's crazy good. Um, and I can definitely see a reality where we put these into. You're actually building them on-prem for your customers.
Amazing.
Um, that's where, and this is where this NVIDIA product, the Nemo Claw, comes in. Now,
Mhm.
that's not easy to understand. So I recommend if you're interested in talking about it, set up a time with me and or maybe I'll do one of these on it. But I think that Hermes agent plus
Mhm.
Nemo Claw
Mhm.
and a couple of the other NVIDIA components would be very effective for certain customers.
Got it.
Um, so that's a topic to look at, especially because you can buy if you for $4 or $5,000, a customer could buy a machine that will run like 120 billion parameter model. You could bring down the Nemotron, the open source model
Mhm.
from NVIDIA, run all that suite on top of it, have it fully governed and plugged into things. Very effective. Might be a real answer, and it'll be basically like I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference with an open claw depending on how you set it up.
Got it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Well, great. I will continue. I'll schedule a second version of Claude Code. So anyway, thanks
Good.
everybody for participating.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Lively chat today. Love it. I mean, but everyone's a superstar. Thank you, Steve, so
Yeah.
much. I hope you get all that fiber optic internet very soon.
Oh my God. It's worth being down a day or two, I'll tell
See,
you.
it really is. I had it when I was in New York. Delicious. Everyone take great care of yourselves and one another and stay safe out there and see you next time.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Bye, all.
Bye.
All right, Alex, we good?
Yeah, we're good. I'm going to close the room in about 30 seconds.
All right.
Thanks
Have a
all.
great day.